In this presentation, I want us to talk about predictive analysis. Intelligence is really about the ability to make some prediction, use evidence to formulate some judgments about what's likely to happen. And so I want to show you at least one way that predictive analysis can be done based on Robert Clark's book, A Target-Centric Approach to Intelligence Analysis. So let's have a look. First thing we need to know that in an estimative approach, there are three main facets to it. Extrapolation, projection, and forecasting. And these will become a little clearer as we go along. But keep in mind, these are the three main approaches that we have. Extrapolation is really about pulling out and identifying some factors that have shaped something. Projection then lends itself to assessing what things may look like if there are some changing forces, and forecasting is what things may look like if there were some changing forces and some new forces shaping that particular event or target that we're looking at. And again, this will make a little bit more sense as I move through this presentation. So as I said, extrapolation. It's looking at least one past state and one present state of the target entity. So how was it created? What were the forces that had created that particular target or entity? And you assess whether those forces have acted upon the entity to bring it into its present state. So essentially that means what forces have created it to be like it is now. And the extrapolation comes in that we say, well, the forces that have created this target entity are unchanged. So therefore, the future state is likely to be unchanged as well. So that would be an extrapolation. So we know that the forces that have created it or have brought it into its present period have stayed the same. Therefore, if nothing changes, that target entity is likely to be unchanged as well because there are no new forces or no changing forces shaping that target entity. The next one is projection. Now, projection estimates that there are some changes in what have shaped that existing force and what's likely to occur. So a change of one of the existing forces will obviously change and cause a projected future state that's going to be different from the extrapolation state. So because there are changing forces, we can expect that the target entity will change as well because that force that is working on the entity is changing. And the third one that I wanted to bring about is that from an extrapolated state or a projection state, if there are new forces that are acting on a target entity, then we need to forecast how those new forces will affect the entity. So the new forces means that the target will have a different state to that of the extrapolated state or the projected states because this is a new force that's working upon it. Now, this comes a bit clearer with this diagram, believe it or not. And you will notice, if I just highlight pen here, if you notice that we have the target model, the target that we're making our assessment upon is here. So the past target model was here. But then some forces have emerged to change the target from what it was to what it is now, here. So these forces. So if these forces continue to shape the target as it is now, we can expect that the extrapolated state, the future state, will be the same as the present because the forces that are shaping it, the unchanged force here, unchanged force there, that's shaping it isn't going to change. Now, if we find that the forces, one force might remain the change, but another force might change, then we can start projecting what change will impact the present target model into the future. So how might it change the target? And so we begin to work through and to predict how things might change in that projected state. Now the third one that we've covered is that scenario 3 here, where the forecast of the target model is changing because we have a changing force that have shaped it, we have an unchanging force that has shaped it, that has remained constant since the very beginning, and yet we have a new force that's coming in to shaping this. So we then begin to forecast that the target is likely to change and how it's likely to change based on the changing force, but also upon the new force. So that becomes targeting. Now, if I show you the following one, it's a bit different way, but it's the same sort of model approach in that we look here, there are historical forces that have changed it from what it was to what it is now. And as I said, if those forces continue to be the same, then we're in an extrapolated state in the future model where the target is likely not going to change either because the forces haven't changed. If there are some changing forces, we can project that there will be a change in the model, as I pointed out. And if there are new forces coming in as well as changing forces and existing forces, we can forecast again a change. So how do we get to all this point? And what are forces? So going back to this model, forces are what has shaped or created something. And how do we identify them? Well, the first thing is we need to be very familiar with the target. So we need to know the structure of the target. So for point of example, if the target is an organisation, we need to think, well, what forces had traditionally brought the organisation into being? So what factors were there that created the organisation? And you identify what those factors were that created that particular organisation. You know, it could be, perhaps if we use the context of a street gang, perhaps the forces that created it may have been youth unemployment and perhaps a poor economy. So high youth unemployment and a poor economy had forced these individuals together to form a youth gang, which would be our present target. Now, if the forces of, and again for argument's sake, if the forces of high youth unemployment and a bad economy continue to be the driving force of this youth gang, then we can expect that in an extrapolated state, the gang will remain the same and those forces will remain unchanged. Now, if the forces were to change, or at least one of them was to change, perhaps in this case, high youth unemployment stays, but the economy begins to improve, then we can project that maybe there will be some change in the organised youth gang's conduct or its membership or any number of possible changes we begin to scenario and think out. If we were to then say, well, yep, the youth unemployment is still high, that is our unchanging force. The changing force is the economy is getting better. But then we might have a new force, which might be the creation of a youth street gang task force set up by the local law enforcement. So that would be a new force that would be impacting on that particular youth crime gang. And so again, we could then see and suspect that the forecast will likely change. So despite there being high unemployment, the economy is better, but there's also a targeted operation on this particular gang. So again, we could forecast what possible changes may exist. So that's a brief overview. And again, the way that you identify these forces can be done through pest analysis or even a SWOT analysis to help identifying what those forces were. And that's the real key to this, is to understand what the forces are and how the forces have created or shaped that particular entity. So to conclude, have a read of Clarke's chapter, and perhaps there's a small exercise on the Interact site that you can also do. So have a go at that, and by all means, please contact me.